Haunted Ohio, Vol.1, by Chris Woodyard. Chapter 6. The Phantoms of the Opera. Theatrical Ghosts. Ghosts do fear no laws, nor do they care for popular applause. A poor player who frets and struts his hour upon the stage, if life can be represented by the image of the ethereal actor, the theater becomes the world in microcosm. All of the forest balconies in a ghostly whisper. If intense emotions can create a ghost, perhaps even those simulated on the stage can leave a remnant. Or perhaps the play still goes on long after the curtain is rung down. Alice, the ghostly actress. Joe E. Brown and Eva Marie Saint, two unlikely theatrical bedfellows, but linked at Bowling Green State University as the names of two university theaters haunted by a ghostly actress named Alice. Despite differing stories about the origins of the theatrical apparition, Alice's appearances are real enough, at least as real as the magic on the stage. In one tale, Alice was an actress playing Desmond, who was killed by a falling object during the performance of Othello. In the second story, she was a former theater student killed in a car crash while returning to the university to collect her award as Actress of the Year. Superstition holds that Alice must be officially invited to all performances by the stage manager alone on the stage after the final dress rehearsal. You have to thank her for letting you use the theater, invite her to the performance, and thank her for letting the play get that far, a senior theater major said. Wes, who did the honors one year. As soon as I was done inviting her, I heard this rumbling that sounded like, "I'll be there." I ran out of the theater. If she feels snubbed, says Wes, Alice shows her resentment. She's in control. If she doesn't want you there, she'll make sure you know it. You have to be nice to her, he says, citing the minor disasters that have happened when Alice's favorite ghost light, which is always left burning on the stage as a safety precaution, is inadvertently turned off. Nails come out on sets, things get tipped over, lights burn out, things that could happen anyway, but they only tend to happen when you don't leave her light on. Another theater major, Mark, was setting up the stage one Friday when he thought he saw something out of the corner of his eye. Turning around, he realized that there was a figure standing next to him. The part about it that bothered me was that I kept looking and she didn't fade. The figure had long hair and wore a skirt. She was more like a shadow, and she held out her arm to me. Mark ran out of the theater in terror. Later, he regretted not staying and getting to know Alice a little better. Alice seems to enjoy her role of spirit stage manager, but she still harbors ambitions to go back on the stage. During a 1986 performance of Othello, Craig was waiting in the wings to go on when he was startled by a figure in Elizabethan costume standing in the stairwell. Thinking that was the actress playing Desmond, was not on stage as she should have been, he screamed, "Where's Mary?" The figure vanished. Then Craig saw Mary on stage. If it is true that the actress who was Alice died as Desmond, what could be more natural than Alice making her comeback in that role, returning for one final curtain call? The Ghost of Fisher Hall. Fisher Hall on the campus of Miami University, Oxford, has been a beautiful building. Originally built as a dormitory for a women's college, it possesses a sweepingly elegant staircase, an upper floor ballroom ornamented with carved plasterwork, and a resident ghost. By the time Professor Geoffrey Fishburne of the Miami University Theater Department came to Miami in September of 1967, the upper stories of the building had been condemned as unsafe for public use. The beautiful staircases were blocked with walls of drywall and barbed wire. The upper floors, divided into small rooms, were only used for storage. It was a strange place to work, says Fishburne, who taught at Fisher from 1967 to 1969. Some of the first stories Fishburne heard were about the alleged haunting of the hall. One told how a large and heavy portrait bust of Judy Elam Fisher, who gave the money to build the hall, moved each night to a different room. After a few rounds of hide-and-seek with the bust, someone had the idea of graphing its movements. When plotted on a graph paper, they spelled out EF for Elaine Fisher. What was more puzzling was a square or diamond-shaped figure formed by the last four movements of the bust, until someone remembered that Fisher had been known as the Diamond Judge, for the diamond stick-pin he sported in his cravat. Several weeks after its disappearance, the bust was recovered on the top floor of the building. Security was baffled. The bust was too large and too unwieldy to have been carried up the only flight of stairs left open to the top floor. While they were trying to figure out what to do with it, the bust disappeared again, this time for good. 3 months after his arrival, Fishburne got his own taste of Fisher's mysteries. He taught in the old dining hall that had been converted to a theater by risers and some folding chairs. A small platform had been built over the door to hold the light and soundboards. In order to hoist heavy equipment into the platform, a winch was improvised from a steel drum and about 15 feet of heavy rope. The winch was placed in a storage room directly over the platform. A hole was drilled through the ceiling and the rope let down through the hole. When not in use, the rope hung by the platform, knotted into a ball so it wouldn't slip through the hole. As Fishburne began his lecture that day, he saw the rope quivering. Joking, he said to the class, "You have an unparalleled opportunity to see the ghost of Judge Fisher shaking that rope. He just wants to let you know that he's here." The whole class turned to stare at the rope, which was still moving. Some students laughed. Then Fishburne resumed the lecture as the rope stopped. "We didn't really think too much of it. We were used to hearing noises overhead, footsteps and dragging sounds from workmen moving things in and out of the storage areas. I just assumed that somebody working up there had moved the rope." A few minutes later, Fishburne glanced at the rope again. It was moving again, more vigorously this time. "Ah," I thought to myself, "somebody up there knows there's a class in here and they're playing a little joke." Then the movement subsided, so I went back to my lecture and didn't pay any attention. Later, Fishburne's attention was drawn back to the rope. The rope was dancing violently as if someone was yanking it up and down on it. Still sure that it was only a workman playing a trick, Fishburne ignored it and finished the class. After class, Fishburne went to turn on the lights. I glanced up to see the rope. The rope was not there. And the strange thing was, the knot in the rope was larger than the hole. It could not have been jerked through the hole. Intrigued, Fishburne looked around for plaster dust, but saw none. He decided to investigate. Fishburne knew that the second floor was used for storage, but had never been upstairs. It was kept locked and off-limits to all but the physical plant crew. He made an appointment with security. "I wanted to check on the winch." That was the story I gave. The next afternoon, he followed the guard outside. They entered through the only entrance, a side door with a separate key. Then the guard left him. The stairway was narrow and dark. It had been the servants' stairs, when the building was new. The upstairs was dirty and dangerously decayed. Items were stored in the rooms close to the stairs. Further away, rooms stood empty. Many of them looked as though nobody had entered them in years. Dirt and dust lay in inches thick on all the floors. Fishburne worked his way towards where the room that held the winch stood. He pushed open what he thought was the right door. I could tell that this was the winch room by the hole punched in the floor. Only there was no winch, just an empty room with a dark outline in the dust on the floor. The outline of the frame that had held the winch. Eerie as the upper floor was, Fishburne still clung to a logical explanation. "Oh, I understand," he thought. "They needed the winch for something, and came here to get it, and came up here and they got it." He turned to leave, but something made him pause at the door and looked back. Suddenly he realized with a chill that there were no footprints in the dust except his own. The only marks in the floor were those of the frame. There was no indication that anyone had walked across to that floor. And now Fishburne was really spooked. He called the physical plant to ask if anyone had taken the winch. To his dismay, he found that not only had they not taken it, no one had been in the building that day. The winch was never found. It got to be a tradition that after opening nights, when the stage manager had locked up and began the walk home, he would see the second floor blaze with light. Fishburne says this happened to him so many times he finally stopped reporting it to security. By the time they'd get there, the light would be turned out, he shrugged. They would never found anyone or any traces of anyone. And when he and the physical plant crew inspected, they found there was no electricity to the upper level. The wires had been cut and the fuses had been removed. Not all of the doings at Fisher were supernatural. Fishburne explained, "It was an unwritten assumption that one of the things you had to do was break into Fisher Hall. It was sort of a rite of passage to brave the ghost. So there were constant break-ins at night. It got so bad that security stationed officers at the building all night. About every other night they'd have to arrest somebody." Fishburne's theater students inadvertently helped to put a stop to the break-ins and to create a new legend about Fisher Hall. Fishburne got permission to store some large props in the basement. His playful students arranged the props, a coffin, department store mannequin, and 4 large candlesticks, to look like a corpse lying in state. "We got a call from security asking about the devil worship in Fisher Hall. Some students had broken into the room in the middle of the night and were scared out of their minds. They came running over to security to tell about the coffins with dead people they'd seen. Security was kind of grateful to us, so we left the coffin as it was." Fisher Hall was demolished in 1971, and a new conference center was built on its site. There was a number of incidents while it was being built. There are rumors that things are still happening, although university officials are spooked by any discussion of the matter. Perhaps things will always go bust in the night, as long as the Diamond Judge still wanders. The Ghost on Stage. Dayton boasts not 1 but 2 haunted theaters. The home of the Dayton Philharmonic is Memorial Hall. Built in 1909, it was renovated in 1956, and at the behest of music-loving society lady who was tired of poor acoustics and neck-craning views. She made sure that there wasn't a bad seat in that house. The renovation didn't do anything for the assistant custodian named Drake, who accidentally fell into the orchestra pit about 30 years ago, breaking his hip and dying shortly afterwards. Ever since, there have been strange noises at the hall that aren't the orchestra tuning up. Doug Pascal, A head stagehand at Memorial Hall says that most of the stagehands say take Drake's ghostly doings in stride. Drake's back, they say when they hear the noises where no noise ought to be. Or that's Drake, they remark when lights come on mysteriously. And there goes Drake when they hear an invisible somebody walking across the overhead catwalks. Pascal chuckles about Drake, the weird noises, and the flashing lights, which he attributes to electronical gremlins. He also tells of being alone in the building at 3 a.m. one morning. I went through the whole building, got everybody out, and locked up. Then I went back to my office, changed my clothes, and I heard a toilet flush in the bathroom above my office. Being a very security-conscious employee, Pascal knew he hadn't left anyone in the building. A bit sheepishly, he says, I left in a hurry. I didn't even check the building out. I just left. And left Drake on the job. The Ghost of the Victoria. The ethereal curtain. From her sparkling glass and bronze doors to her pale green walls trimmed with gold, the Victoria Theatre is a grand dame, the undisputed queen of Dayton's theatrical scene. The Victoria's green marble pillars and plush seats aren't the only attraction, however, says house manager David Hastings. The Victoria boasts at least 2 ghosts. The most romantic and well-documented ghost of the Victoria is Vicky, a flirtatious phantom who in life was an actress. In the early 1900s, she retired to her dressing room between acts to change into a black taffeta dress for her next scene. Another actor met her coming down the stairs. She stopped and said, "I forgot my fan," and went back up the stairs to her dressing room. She was never seen again. The black taffeta dress she'd changed into was gone, as was the matching fan. There was no sign of foul play. It was as a crack had opened in the wall, and she had walked into it. Of course, the gossips' wagging tongues whispered that Vicky had run off with a lover. After all, actresses were no better than they should be. Except that there were only 2 exits from her dressing room, down a stairway past the guard who saw her enter, or out a 3rd-story window. The mystery was never solved, but her dressing room developed into a reputation for being haunted. Vicky's ghostly face was sometimes seen forming like a haze on the mirror. The room's door refused to stay shut. Could Vicky have been murdered in the dressing room and her body hidden until it could be smuggled out? Or possibly in a costume trunk? Or did the actress who created other realities on the stage somehow walk into another dimension? Vicky must have been an enchanting creature, for she manifests herself in ultra-feminine ways, by the delicious rustle of her taffeta petticoats, by the elusive scent of her rose perfume that lingers where she has passed, by the light tap of her footsteps across the stage. House manager David Hastings had heard those footsteps and smells her perfume. He has felt Vicky brush by him as she sweeps down the staircase. So have many other people. In 1990, as WDTN Channel 2 was taping a Halloween segment on ghosts, there was a noise from the balcony stairwell. Producer Martha Dunsky went to the area where the noise had been heard, thinking to shush the culprit, but found nothing. Instead, everyone heard the rustling of fabric. They thought it was a joke played by the stagehands, until they realized that they were alone in the theater. Vicky initially didn't like the plans to restore the Victoria. On the evening of the last show before the theater closed for renovation, a distraught marketing director came to Hastings and told them about a vibrating chair in her office. Hastings was skeptical, but when he went to check, sure enough, the chair was vibrating. "The ghost doesn't want us to change the Victoria," the marketing director told Hastings. Being a practical sort, he checked for motors all over the building and found nothing. He came back to the office. He sat in the chair. It gently vibrated beneath him. During the 2-year renovation, construction workers were baffled when their tools were moved mysteriously. Many reported a feeling that someone was behind them, although when they turned, no one visible was there. Strange shadows were seen flitting about the gutted building. When the restoration was finished, there was doubt that Vicky had stayed. After all, other ghosts have been dislodged from their hauntings by renovations. Everything was quiet for a few weeks, but then a security wondered aloud if Vicky was still around, and at that exact moment she smelled rose perfume stronger than ever. Vicky roams the building at will, but she especially likes to visit the Victoria offices on the 2nd floor and the reception room just outside. Formerly elusive of late, Vicky has become bolder, conquestish. One might say even. Formerly, only a select few smelled the perfume, but now many people are noticing it. It has been especially evident in the vestibule near the ticket window. Even the security guards comment that they feel like they are walking through a cloud of scent. Yes, the perfume has been really busy, Hastings says. She's letting us know that she's still there. Perhaps that means that Vicky is more relaxed about the renovations and, he laughs, getting back to her old haunts. That was in the first week of May, 1991. On May 21st, I got a startling phone call. "I saw her," says the woman on the phone. She is cool, restrained. She is an employee of the Victoria whom I will call Kate. She believes that she has just seen the ghost of Victoria. Early one morning, Kate went to her supply closet inside the women's restroom on the 3rd floor. I heard a noise, kind of a foreign noise. I stopped and listened, but I didn't hear anything more. So I got some rags and I started to walk through the door to the hall. For some reason, I stopped and looked toward the stalls, 20 or so feet away. The door to one of the stalls was open. I saw the dress, and it looked like a woman seen from the back. I didn't see a head. Everything up there was black. It wasn't the whole image of her, but I saw her dress. It was a black dress, tight-fitting at the waist, flowing into not pleats but loose folds. The dress didn't look stiff but very soft. I saw it from about the armpits down. I didn't see the arms. It was the biggest shock. I felt like the hair on my arms stood up about 2 inches, but I wasn't afraid, just startled. When I automatically shook my head to clear it, it took my eyes away. And then she wasn't there, but the stall door swung shut. Okay, I thought. I want explanations. I walked out the door and thought, no, I didn't really just see what I think I saw. And then I went back to the bathroom, turned on the lights, and checked the stall. And of course no one was there. I turned off the lights, moved around some to see if there was any reflection on anything that could have fooled me. And there wasn't. Did she try to talk to the ghost? Yes, I did, Kate says a little sheepishly. I talked to her out loud. I said, "Are you ready to talk to me, or are we just going to play a while? Because if you're going to talk to me, please don't scare me. I don't want to all of a sudden turn a corner and see you standing there." And then I said to myself, "Kate, you are talking to yourself." She confides that she has named the ghost she doesn't believe in. I call her Miss Victoria. I'm the only one who calls her that. The others call her Betsy. And the reception room on the 3rd floor is the place I've encountered her the most. When I'm vacuuming She's brushed up against my hair. It's a real eerie feeling. There's got to be some explanation. There isn't any real reason for that to happen. I've had things move. I've smelled her perfume. Brooms fall. Brooms that I put in corners so they won't fall, and all of a sudden, boom. I'll find my cleaning rags sitting all in the middle of the hallway. Doors will slam shut. Lights will come on. Kate thinks that Vicky might be working up to a complete materialization, a little bit at a time, to get me used to her. If I talk about her, will that make her go away? If there is such a thing, if she needs to talk to somebody, I'll talk to her, just so she doesn't scare me. Kate wonders if she has been singled out. Why me? I don't believe. I've never been looking for her. It seems that she kinda likes me. I just hope she knows how to do windows. She shakes her head. The strange thing is, I don't really believe. I'm not a real good skeptic, but so many things have happened to me. I would have said nah, but I know what I saw. I know. And then Kate says in wonder, in 2 hours, I will have myself convinced that this never ever happened. A malicious spirit. One of the other ghosts of the Victoria is a ghost of trauma. At the turn of the century, a young girl named Lucille was seated in one of the boxes at the Victoria. In those days, folding screens were placed at the entrances of the boxes to keep out drafts and to hide the maid who accompanied the young women as chaperones. Somehow the chaperone was lured away, and a violent madman dragged Lucille behind the screen and assaulted her. Another theater patron heard screams and rescued her before she was murdered by the lunatic. The Dayton newspaper fumed that it was an outrage when the young woman couldn't attend a matinee in safety. After the incident, Lucille and her family moved east. Lucille married and lived to be an old woman and died a natural death. But something of that violent assault lingered on to haunt the box. It was said that whenever anyone of a vicious temperament, anyone with anger in their heart came into that box, the temperature would drop. For years, Hastings, who had been an actor, thought that the box, which was called the left box in contemporary newspaper reports, was at stage left, or the right-hand box as you face the stage. In the late 1970s, some mediums visited the theater. They felt angry energy in the opposite box, the one on the left as you face the stage, or house left. This turned out to be the true site of the assault. 5 years later, Hastings and his friend Steve were checking the house before leaving for the evening. Steve is a psychologist, and he didn't know the story of the box. As Steve entered the box, he let out a yell. Hastings says, "I came rushing upstairs, calling, 'What happened? What's the matter?' I heard Steve exclaim, 'I feel like I've been slapped.' By the time I got to him, he was sitting in the back of the theater, his face in shadow. 'Did you and Lucille get into an argument?' I teased him. He mumbled something about an insect bite. As he moved into the light, there, imprinted very clearly on his face, visible even through his beard, was the red mark of a handprint. Why would Lucille single out Steve? I asked Hastings. Was he a violent sort of person? He smiled slightly. He was a very angry person, one of the angriest people I've ever known. The other ghost of the Victoria. Sometime in the 1880s, there was a suicide in the theater. The man is said to have impaled himself on a knife fastened to the back of a seat. The blood ran down the Victoria's floor into the orchestra pit. The suicide's misty face was seen on the heavy velvet drapes that hung in the doors to the backstage before they were replaced by real doors. If you visit the Victoria, you will enjoy the splendor of the turn-of-the-century decor. But think only good thoughts in the box at the left house, and listen for the rustle of Vicky's skirts, as a little late, a little breathlessly, she makes her invisible entrance, a lovely mystery to the last. McConnellsville's Haunted Opera House. In the old river town of McConnellsville, the great stone arch over the theater doors proclaim 1890 Opera House. Galen Finley, the owner of the Connellsville Opera House Theater, is reminiscing about how he came to own the theater. I went to the movies every Saturday night with my grandma. We saw Ma and Pa Kettle, Roy Rogers, Abbott, and Costello. It was the only thing to do in the town. I practically grew up in the opera house. He worked as an usher in the theater, and when the owner told me she was going to close it, she said, "Why don't you buy it? I'll make you a good deal." Finley shrugs. My dad said we'd done stranger things. So in 1962, he bought it with an eye to restoring its 1890s beauty. Finley was a skeptic about things supernatural when he bought the theater. We'd always heard it was haunted, and I didn't believe it. It was the biggest joke in the world, he laughs. Now I'm a believer. Trust me. The first incident happened the third day after Finley bought the theater. I had an employee there, and we were getting ready to clean. Both of us heard the piano and a lady singing, just as clear as could be. He looked at me and said, "All right, who've you got planted backstage to put the fear in me?" I said, "Nobody. I hear it too." We looked at each other like, "What?" So we laid down our mops and went backstage. The stage hadn't been used for a long time. The drapes were all rotted. There were cobwebs everywhere, dust a foot thick. Nobody ever went back there, and it was spooky. And we went through the door, and we saw the piano sitting there, the lid down over the keyboard covered with dust and cobwebs, and we got out of there. That was only the beginning, says Finley. You constantly felt like there were people with you or watching you. You could hear people walking around. I tried to use logic to say it was floors settling or something. That didn't work. For 2 years, he worked on restoring that theater. It is an elegant place with a Victorian sound dome and chandelier. The seats in the horse-hoe balcony are red plush. The curtains are red velour with gold fringe. In the lobby, Finley stripped off layers of rubber linoleum and carpets to reveal the original multicolored tile work. Above the lobby doors are brilliant stained glass windows. During the restoration, Finley held a party on the stage. 6 people went in a group to the bathroom, which were out front near the box office. When they came back, they said to Finley, "All right, who's the guy in the white suit you've got standing at the back of the auditorium?" "What guy in a white suit? Don't feed us that line. We've all seen him, all 6 of us." Finley started out of the auditorium. There was no one there. He walked around the curtains to the back of the theater and found the door to the theater still locked. From his guests' descriptions, the guy in the white suit sounded like an elderly gentleman who'd worked in the theater for 30 years as an usher. He always wore a light tan or white suit, and his name was Everett. "We all know that Everett is there," says Finley. "Every so often he likes to flush the toilets. And then, too, one night during the movie, the main drape decided to close. It opened about 4 feet and stopped. I had to run back and open it by hand. Another evening, the switch just clicked by itself and the house lights went on and off. Everett isn't the only ghost at the opera house. For a while, Finley lived backstage. One night, a friend of his was staying the night. The man leaped off the couch where he was settled down and said, 'Look!' Finley looked into the maze of ropes and catwalks and saw a woman walking up to the hemp gallery where they flew the scenery. "Both of us went and stayed at my mother's house," says Finley. "It looked just like a transparent figure, like a fog going through. It was wearing some kind of a long gown." Another time, Finley was alone in the theater at night. "I was playing the organ and I heard someone walk down the aisle. I thought to myself, I'll just go on playing until they're right behind me, and then I'll scare them. I continued to play. Then I leapt off the bench and jumped into the aisle. There was nothing, no one that I could see. I went right over to the top of the organ and out the door." Finally, Finley had a Catholic priest bless the theater. Even the priest commented on how spooky the building was. There were fewer incidents after the priest's visit, but, says Finley, they're coming back now, or at least they didn't all go. Finley laughs as if that's okay with him. "Every old place ought to have a ghost. Some of the boys who work here can feel Everett's presence. They aren't scared of him. It's just knowing that there's something unseen, something that you know is there but you can't see. We all know we still have Everett. Everett has stayed." The ghost with the best seat in the house. The Sorg Opera House, Incorporated in Middletown, turned 100 years old in 1991. Age hasn't dimmed the beauty of this unique theater, nor has it curtailed the activities of the theater's original owner, Paul J. Sorg. Paul J. Sorg, sometimes known as the last of the robber barons, was the second wealthiest man in Ohio. He owned a paper company, tobacco concerts, and loaned money to James Cox so he could buy the Dayton Daily News and the flagship of Cox Enterprises. He served as a member of Congress and has a finger in every financial pie. Sorg's wife, Jenny, was stage-struck. To please her, Sorg built the opera house and gave her carte blanche to bring back top acts from New York. Trains used to bring theater lovers from Cincinnati to Middletown. The Sorg saw live opera, Otis Skinner, John McCormick, George M. Conan, a very young Bob Hope. From 1915 to 1986, it showed movies, including the first talkie in Middletown, a horse opera called In Old Arizona. In 1929, it became a full-time movie house. After a 1935 fire, the Sorg was renovated and reopened in 1939. In that renovation, the second balcony was hidden by a false ceiling. The balcony still exists, frozen in time with its bench seating and the original rose and gold plasterwork. There was a definite hierarchy to the theater seating. Blacks entered through a separate entrance and sat in the second balcony with the men in suits. No women were allowed there, and it was an unclothed place. Restorers say they had to shovel the tobacco juice out of the second balcony. The more genteel orchestra and first balcony sections required patrons to wear full evening dress. Paul J. paid careful attention to such social niceties. He was a naughty dresser, a swell as dandies were known in the 1890s. So it was not surprising that his ghost wears full evening dress as he sits in his favorite seat in the first row of the first balcony. Many people, janitors, caretakers, actors, and stagehands, have seen the ghostly figure in 1890s evening dress. Those who have gotten a glimpse of the face say that it matches the portraits of Sorg in the theater lobby, down to the mustache. Whenever anyone approaches the figure to ask what it wants, it just disappears. Living or dead, as owners of the opera house, Paul J. could hardly be expected to talk to his social inferiors. Other witnesses believe that they have seen and heard someone walking the catwalks above the stage. Barbara Hilger, for example. She has served on the Sorg Board of Trustees. She is a former secretary of the organization, and she has done much technical work for theater, including rebuilding stage lighting for the all-volunteer group. The first experience I had, she says, the tenor Robert White was in town and the Vol.1 had loaned us a beautiful grand piano. I had been cleaning up and I sat down to play. I always lock the theater when I'm in there alone, so I was surprised to hear footsteps on the metal grid platform above the stage where the pulleys are hung. Hilger emphasizes that the sound was not a vague creaking, but definite footfalls. I left rather quickly. The year after this, we had the Cookie Cook and Friends, a tap dancing ensemble. 3 of us were there at about 2 in the morning, hanging lights and bringing in the sound system for the Saturday night show. The theater was locked as usual, but all of us heard distinctive footfalls going across the back of the stage. We all looked at each other and kind of quietly walked Indian file out of there. The current owner has taken over Paul J. Sorg's favorite seat. It's his favorite too, says Hilliger. We just hope that Paul J. still enjoys the shows. The ghost has the best seat in the house.